In early August 2019, tens of thousands of additional troops poured into Jammu and Kashmir. Overnight, internet and phone lines were severed. Prominent local politicians were placed under house arrest, and a strict curfew emptied the streets. The next morning, the Indian government revealed why they had locked down the entire region. They announced the immediate revocation of Article 370. For 7 decades, Article 370 was a highly guarded constitutional provision. It granted Jammu and Kashmir a unique special status, keeping it legally distinct from the rest of the country. Overturning a 70-year-old constitutional guarantee overnight requires a precise sequence of administrative and legislative steps. We need to look at exactly how the government executed this maneuver and what removing that boundary actually means for the people living there. The origin of this special status traces back to the partition of British India in 1947. During the split, Jammu and Kashmir was a princely state, a territory caught right on the border between the newly formed nations of India and Pakistan. The ruler of the state, Maharaja Hari Singh, had a clear preference. He did not want to join either country. His goal was to establish Kashmir as a completely independent kingdom. That neutrality broke down when thousands of Pakistani-backed tribal militias violently invaded the territory. Facing total collapse, Hari Singh desperately reached out to India for military backup. India agreed to send troops, but only after a significant concession. On October 26, 1947, Hari Singh signed the Instrument of Accession, officially folding his state into the Indian Union in exchange for survival. But the transfer of power was limited. The agreement strictly restricted India's control to exactly 3 areas: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. Kashmir retained authority over all other internal matters. This specific compromise gave birth to Article 370, and later Article 35A. Together, they guaranteed Jammu and Kashmir its own constitution, its own flag, and strict local protections that barred outsiders from buying Kashmiri land or taking local government jobs. Originally, framers on both sides viewed this as a temporary bridge to stabilize a war-torn region. Over time, that bridge solidified into a 70-year constitutional anomaly. The Indian Constitution included a specific legal requirement for any change to Article 370. The provision could only be revoked with the explicit recommendation of Jammu and Kashmir's Constituent Assembly. There is just one massive historical roadblock. That Constituent Assembly had officially drafted the state's constitution and then formally dissolved itself in 1957. Without an assembly to grant permission, the legal mechanism to remove the article was essentially frozen in time. Article 370 appeared to be a permanent fixture of the Constitution. To bypass the dead assembly, the central government executed a multi-step strategy. First, in 2018, the state was placed under president's rule. This meant local elected officials lost their power, and the state was run directly by a centrally appointed governor. The second step involved a formal redefinition of the constitutional language. The president issued an order stating that the term Constitutional Assembly would now be interpreted to mean the Legislative Assembly, the state's active parliament. Because the state was under president's rule, the powers of that local legislative assembly were temporarily being exercised by the National Indian Parliament in New Delhi. Since the Indian Parliament was acting with the authority of the state legislature, it effectively provided the consent required by Article 370 to void itself. Immediately after, the government passed the Reorganization Act. This stripped Jammu and Kashmir of its statehood and split the region into 2 distinct entities, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Crucially, both were downgraded to union territories. Unlike states, union territories are administered directly by the central government, which significantly reduces the democratic power held by local residents. By using this sequence of administrative redefinitions while the local government was suspended, New Delhi bypassed the need for regional consent and forced the full legal integration of Kashmir. With Article 35A gone, the legal barrier isolating the region's economy vanished. For the first time, citizens from across India can legally buy property and invest capital directly in Kashmir. Supporters argue this will lead to a flood of corporate investment. The expectation is that outside money will accelerate infrastructure projects, creating new jobs for the local population. Furthermore, national laws that previously stopped at the border, like the right to education and various minority protections, now fully apply to Kashmiri citizens. From a security perspective, officials believe economic development is the ultimate counter to insurgency. By replacing poverty and isolation with industrial growth, they aim to reduce the disenfranchisement that feeds militant recruitment. For those backing the decision, this was a necessary step to resolve a decades-old cycle of stagnation. They view the legal move as a way to bring the region into the national economic fold. However, stripping away property protections has ignited deep anxieties among local Kashmiris. There is a persistent fear that wealthy outsiders will buy up the land, inflating prices and displacing the existing population. That anxiety extends to the labor market. Local citizens now find themselves competing with a nationwide pool of over 1 billion people for regional government jobs and university scholarships. Beyond the economic fears is a profound outrage over the method. Dissolving a state's distinct constitutional identity and downgrading its political power while the population is under a military curfew is heavily criticized as an authoritarian overreach. To critics, the revocation is not an act of integration, but a betrayal of the original 1947 pact. They argue it sets a dangerous precedent where the central government can dismantle the rights of any state without its consent. Today, the reality on the ground is highly complex. The region has seen a revival in tourism and significant infrastructure growth, but this coexists with a heavy military presence and a reduction in local political agency. The legal barrier between Kashmir and the rest of India has been removed from the constitution. However, achieving true national integration relies on winning the trust of the Kashmiri people.